Greg Broccoli.
Hello, everybody. I know we got a couple mics up here, so I'm going to probably use this guy. Oh, wireless one. Oh, so I could walk a little bit. But so this is that time of year where I love actually traveling around, getting to talk to families, students, whether you're looking at a place like Binghamton, which there's going to be a flavor of Binghamton in this, or if you're just out there looking at a random assortment, which I hope it's not a random assortment when you're looking at schools, but a random assortment of schools, because I love getting an idea of what the next 2, 3, really 4 years are going to look like for students as they get ready to graduate from a place like Tuckahoe to go wherever that may bring you. We're going to get into what that might mean. But just a quick backstory and why I enjoy coming out and being at places like this is I did grow up in the area not too far from here. My family's from Dobbs Ferry. I actually then went up to high school up in Carmel, New York, so Putnam County. Grew up at a pretty big high school, but graduated knowing I wanted maybe something slightly bigger, but maybe a small college, maybe a big university, not quite sure. Bigger was always the next level because wherever you go to high school, for the most part, colleges are always bigger. Universities are much bigger than that. So I'm not gonna go too deep into my history and selection because that's not really that relevant, but I did end up at a place, Binghamton University, for my undergraduate years, studying mechanical engineering and then business or graduate school, all at Binghamton, a big public university here in the state of New York. So it was a good fit for me. It took me a long time to figure out what fit really meant. I internally knew it when I was selecting it. I just didn't know how to outwardly say it. You know, I ended up picking a school by flipping a coin 9 times. It was between, at that time, I know we're going back in history, between Binghamton and Villanova University. 2 different schools. I loved them both, but very different. And I had to flip that coin a bunch of times to figure out what is the right spot. Now, for the last 13 years, I've been traveling all around representing Binghamton. I ended up working in our admissions office right after my grad studies there with the job of traveling around the Northeast, talking to prospective engineering students. My undergrad was in engineering, and it was a good fit for me in that stage of my life. And then years later, about a few years after I started, I moved down to New York City, where I'm based for Binghamton these days as the associate director. And I travel mostly in the boroughs and the Westchester County area, and I have a few international assignments that I travel to. But the gist of where I go with this talk is that I want anybody who's thinking about whatever that next level is to have some decent clarity in your minds about what it means not only to get into a list of schools, ideally schools that you're all excited about, what it means to actually succeed at those schools. Yes, in order to get there, you have to be admitted, you have to be carefully reviewed by the admissions office to make sure you're a good fit for us, whatever us is, again, your list of schools. But most importantly, you're going to make the harder decision. Which of the schools that you're admitted to was the right fit for you and will become the right fit. So I want to share some time on that at the end, but this perspective is coming from, yes, I work for a selective public research university here in New York. It's going to have a hint of that, but this is generally larger than that. This is going to be more about myself and my colleagues on the admissions front, what we tend to look at, what we tend to stress when reviewing a student as an applicant to our schools. So I'm going to give this kind of conversation from that era of junior and senior year, the important years of high school. All years are important, but the most important when it comes to college admissions. So this timeline that I'm showing is giving you a broader overview of that overlap between junior and senior year. So when we're looking at this, the search part, which is step 1, is the longest part of it. And in fact, it overlaps all of the other parts because the search part is always ongoing until you end up on that college campus in that fall of post-senior year. But the search is the part that I think is the most fun, the most rewarding, the most exciting, and it should be the part that we're most curious about, at least even at this stage. How many of you out there are seniors or parents of a senior? Okay. Parents, or if you're a junior, parents of the junior year level. Awesome. So anybody sophomore year level, 10th grade, even better in some respects because this search is beginning now. And anybody in 9th grade? Oh yeah, we got both sides there. So the search is, when we talk about it, this is the part that I think we get excited for, but we also, in our minds, sometimes put off longer than we should because, well, once we start that, then it all starts to unravel. We have to start asking and answering questions that we don't know. So we're going to touch on that in a second. The applying stage, well, for seniors, this is the most relevant because you are applying now. In some cases, you've already submitted applications. In some other cases, you're getting ready to do that. And then the deciding, again, that's another big senior year level decision. That's what the colleges are doing. The enrolling, well, that's you. That's you all deciding where to go. Now, to the search, why I love talking about this is that this gives you an opportunity to really think about yourselves in the process. I think if we're doing this right, we're not thinking about what schools am I going to get into, but what schools do I want to be at? Yes, part of that entails you get into a college and a college on that list, but this is a much bigger picture. And if you're doing the search right, you're enjoying it because you're learning a lot more about yourselves, about the family, about what you all are looking for. You're doing this maybe with friends at times where you're getting to travel about, and at that point, you are spending time asking questions or having a friend ask a question you didn't know was a good point. But during that, you're going to be building out a list of schools that, one, resonate with you, schools that you kind of like. Maybe a school's name that you heard from a friend of a friend or a cousin or your counselor recommended or a teacher talked about it. It's within your whatever radius, your 3-hour radius, your 2-hour radius. Maybe you have no radius. 8 hours away is fine. Whatever your sort of lines that you're drawing when you're building out this search list are going to give you some flexible options in the long run, not just to visit and explore, but schools that you're ultimately going to be whittling down a safer list, a smaller list that you're applying to. That is going to generate this idea of exploring. The exploring part is going to be, is this a school or are these lists of schools that have an area of study that I really want in the future? Are these a list of schools that academically I feel ready for? Not schools simply that, oh wow, it'd be nice if I got into that school. I don't think I can, but I'll add all the schools on my list that I don't think I could get into because I heard they're hard to get into. But I'll be a better person if I got in there. Not that kind of building out of a list, but the exploration of, hey, are these schools that after checking out their website, after maybe doing a virtual session, a tour online, or physically setting foot on that campus, that I could see myself at or start to see myself at that school? In addition to the exploration, you're thinking about yourselves as an academic. So seniors, you have maybe the most clear idea to date of who you are. Are you a competitive student? Are you more of that well-rounded collaborative student that wants to really kind of find the middle of the road at a campus where you can shine with other students? Or maybe you're starting to figure out, even in, say, sophomore year, what strengths you have. Are they in the sciences? Are they in the humanities? Are they in both? And that's what you're going to start to look for when you explore a campus. Like, are there opportunities for you to find sort of your people, your group on that campus? And you're going to be keeping an eye out for that. But ultimately, those are a lot of questions that you're going to be asking. Questions you might be asking students on the tour that you're on. Questions like, all right, what do you do on a Wednesday night here? If you're at a residential campus 4 hours away from here, you're not coming home every Wednesday night, right? That's not a commutable distance. And you don't want it to be, right? You want to know, what am I going to be doing on this campus? Not simply does the library look nice or the lecture halls aesthetically look nice. That part will be a wash in the long run. But what is it about this campus that wants to keep you here? If you love athletics, maybe it doesn't mean you need a Division I athletic program to find like that sort of student pride and spirit. It could be a really competitive D3 program that keeps you excited there. These are things, though, I want you thinking about and questioning about what matters. Now, when it gets into that next stage, you're going to be applying to colleges. And this is the part where we start to transition to what are we looking at, right? The colleges. But before we get to the college sort of take on it, you got to understand there's platforms to do this. So For the seniors and the juniors, this information may start to really mean something. Seniors, it should, because you probably are picking an application platform to use and/or already used one. Binghamton uses, all three of these applications, and I'll talk a little bit more how like Binghamton kind of looks at this, so you can think about this for where we resonate with other colleges similar to us. But in general senses, you're picking one of maybe many different application platforms, and often the schools that are on your list, they're probably using a combination of those. So you're not using multiple forms of applications to apply, and I see this happen every year. You don't want to send two different applications to a school. We're gonna have to merge those together, and it's a mess, and frankly, you probably have to pay twice, and you don't wanna do that. It's not as confusing as I'm making it sound, because eventually you're just gonna pick a platform and kind of stick with it, and that's what you're submitting off to a school. But generally, colleges do not care which one you use. We usually just want you to use whatever's easiest for you. So for example, the Common App at the top, there's hundreds of schools that use the Common App. Your information is all preloaded based on when you fill it out the first time. You then select the schools that you're interested in. There could be additional pieces that an individual school is looking for. But generally speaking, that one platform could go off to as all the colleges on your list. There may be a handful of schools that do require a separate platform, like maybe they're only on one platform. Even the SUNY schools are not usually exclusively just on the SUNY application. So there could be a scenario where that is the case, so just keep that in mind when you're getting down to your final list about where to apply. But then there's the when to apply. So we live in this pretty competitive world, I know, you know. When we're out there, we're always worried about the scarcity, the number of spots, the number of students applying. How many students can they possibly take from even a small school like Tuckahoe? And we stress over these things that usually shape up into this timeline of when to apply and when to be a competitive applicant. Generally speaking, apply when you're ready. Ideally, you want to be as ready as early as you can be. So happy we got some seniors and juniors here. Juniors, this is ideally getting you excited. 9th and 10th grade, this means like you are really on the right path, that you should be looking at applying to colleges and universities, likely on the earlier window. There's two different ways that we often hear about that: early action and early decision. Of course, there are many schools that might not have any of those, and they might just have one deadline, a regular decision deadline, or maybe they're a rolling decision type of school. That means apply when you're ready, and as soon as you get it in, they're gonna work to get you a decision back. But back to the earlier stages, if a school has a clear-cut sort of deadline, and you really are interested in that school, and you got all your stuff ready, meaning you got your application ready over the summer or in the beginning of your senior year, you felt like your essay's set, we'll talk about that in a moment, yeah, you're probably aiming for that early window. Now the difference, early action versus early decision, well, not every school offers both. Definitely not every school offers early decision, but I'll just break it down quite quickly. Early action, for the schools that offer it, schools like Binghamton University, all that means is you're taking action early. You're ready to go, you got your application out by the early action deadline. For our case, it's November 1. So for seniors, that's in a couple days from now. We see a good chunk of our applications come in early action. The benefit is you find out by mid-January where you stand. Found out earlier. Now that decision might roll back that you got admitted, that's great. You have all the way up until May 1 to decide. All you simply did was took action early, found out you got in, and then therefore you have a good length of time to decide is this a good fit for you. Other decisions that could pop out then might be you got deferred, which is not a bad spot to be. That means we're still looking at you. We're moving you over to our regular decision pool. And that means you're still in the running. We're going to look at your senior year grades now more in depth because they're now in front of us a little bit more clearly because it's a little later in the year. And that could be a great thing as we move forward to give you another vantage point as we look at your application. Now, the early decision type option, schools that offer that, that means you've decided early where you're going to school. If you get admitted to that school, that's that one school that you do early decision for, you're going there. You're making that commitment via your application, via a signed agreement that you're making with the school and the counseling office here that you're going to that school. That's great if you know for sure there's that one school on your list that you absolutely love, and they just so happen to also offer an early decision timeline to apply by. By no means do you have to apply to a school early decision to be a good candidate out there. There's a part of this that I want to now shift the mindset to what the colleges are starting to understand, right? If you're applying to a school early, what you are signaling is you're ready to go, you're in that competitive mix with the other students applying early, and you did your due diligence to get set. We know you're interested in us, you're applying to us, and you're doing it as early as you can. Those are good signals, especially for schools that are high on your list. Let's say you apply to 10 schools. I would imagine at least 3 of them are schools you absolutely really love. Frankly, all 10 schools are schools that you would be happy to go to. That's the mindset I want us to get into when we get into building our list. But there's probably 3 or so that you know, I really want to be there. I hope I get into one of those 3 schools. That's where I could see myself. I would imagine of those 3, those would be schools you definitely are applying early, if not maybe all of your schools, if they had an early timeline. But frankly, if there's one school that's a clear-cut leader on that and they happen to offer early decision and you had a good conversation with your counselor, yeah, go for that early decision. You're making a commitment to go there, so the pressure's off your shoulders. But guess what? The school knows, hey, if we're taking that student early decision, that's one guaranteed spot that we already have secured away. It's a good thing for both parties in that, right? The college now has fewer, harder decisions to make in the future, right? Because eventually we want to admit the exact number of students we have space for. Well, we admit more than that, right? Because we know you all have more choices than we have. So just that little mystical thing, I should say, on the back end of the day, at the end of the day, I should say, back to that number of schools you're applying to, say you pick 10 schools to apply to, maybe you only get into 3 of the 10. You're going to get into more than 3 of the 10. But let's just say you got into 3 of the 10. You're only going to go to one of those campuses. That means your individual acceptance rate is about 30%, right? You could only pick one of the 3 that you got into. You are more selective as individuals, as parents included, than the majority of colleges out there. We tend to focus so much on the colleges being so selective. We're trying hard to figure out how many of the students can we admit under the pretense of how many can we actually enroll, knowing that you all have great choices to make. And that right there, why I'm sharing that little mindset there, is why sometimes applying early and sometimes applying early decision, you're securing a way to that college, you're taking that spot, and you're ready to go for that. So this could be a good signal to them, so they're going through knowing the math on the back end. Now, obviously, you have to be a good academic fit for the institution. The biggest crux of our decision-making is not when you apply, but who you are as an applicant. So we're going to get into that and what that means. So when we get down into what we're looking at, well, it's you as a student. And ultimately, it's the front part here, the transcripts, that are telling us your academic story. The worst thing we probably could do is simply say, oh, wow, we really like you. We got to meet you. We saw that you at a college fair. You showed us that you're interested. You told me through an email or 2 that you want to be at Binghamton, and we can't wait to have you. But then we look at your academic transcript, and we're like, wow, I don't know if you're going to be a good fit here. You're kind of quite below where our typical student comes in. Oh, but you really like it here. We'll take a chance. Well, we don't want to take chances on students. We want to make sure this is the right spot for you, because unfortunately, on the back end, often when you take a chance, if it's not the right fit for you academically, you're probably one of the students that is looking elsewhere after your first semester to transfer out. That's a lot more work on your part. It's also a lot more work on our part, because now we have to not only find a student for next year, but also the spot that you kind of gave up there. I know I'm making this sound a bit crass in a way. What we're looking at is this a spot you're really going to succeed at academically? Of course, we want to know the other parts of who you are as a person, where you're coming from, what you're interested in, if you're interested in us. But ultimately, most colleges are leaning heavily on your performance here at Tuckahoe. And that doesn't mean everything has to be perfect for you to be a perfect applicant. It means, though, we want to know where you're going over time. You know, if you started not off as best as you could be, and all of a sudden by junior, senior year, you're really hitting your stride, that's a good signal. You might be a little short of where we are academically in our typical review, but you're on a better side of where you were. You started off really strong and you're starting to go down. Maybe junior year was a tough year. Senior year, we're looking for that upward swing again, right? Or at least that there's some progress being made in areas that you may have struggled with, showing that signal that we can take that good faith and confidence and say, look, we want to find a spot for you here. If it's been a rocky road, I see that all the time. Last year, 50,000 students applied to Binghamton. That's 50,000 different academic trajectories. I didn't read all of those 50,000, rest assured, but what we're looking at is, where are you and where are you recovering from where you were? And that's where I'm talking from schools that tend to be on the highest level academic profile. So schools like Binghamton, we tend to see some really high-flying academic students. This is where I want to introduce this idea. Your transcript is giving us a signal of where you might fit with our incoming class, but your job also as students and families is try to understand what type of college do you think you're going to succeed at? And there's a lot of layers to that, but one big layer is your academic performance, right? If you know you're a good B+ average student, and that is a sweet spot for you, you want to look at schools where there are other really strong B+ average students thriving. Because the whole point of college is not just simply to get into a school, but to find a school where you can do your best work at and grow at. And that's why I want to stress the transcripts are a two-sided front here. It's telling us more about you, but it's also letting you see, all right, what type of other students are like me at these other campuses, because I want to find my team, my people to grow with, in a school that's ready to help me get to where I want to go. So look at your transcript as your growth trajectory, but also as a match for a potential fit college in the future. Now, the letters of rec, this is coming from a counselor, a teacher, often both, sometimes from a member in the community, but generally colleges are going to require at least one from a school official, often more, and you're going to get that done. Seniors, you probably already asked your teachers and your counselors writing one. Juniors, you're getting this mindset ready for maybe a teacher you have right now in class that you're doing well in, or maybe a class that you might be struggling in, but you're putting in the good work, right? And that teacher could talk about that fact, that you stay after class or you come after school when you can to do the extra prep work or whatnot. These are people in the school community that are going to tell us, the admissions people, a little bit more about you and where you're growing and maybe some of the obstacles you've overcome if it's in the classroom environment, or maybe how you fit the classroom. Are you more the quiet leader type? Or are you more the vocal leader? Or maybe you're more of the good team player? A letter of recommendation is going to shed some light on. It's not telling us whether we should pick you over somebody else in your high school. That's not what the letters of rec will do. In fact, we might take everybody from Tuckahoe that we think could be a good fit. And the letters of rec, for what it's worth, they recommend students, right? We expect that. They're not telling us that, you should maybe not take this student. So why I stress the letter of rec here? It's not for you to stress out about. That part does its due diligence. We always get strong letters of rec from here. Your teachers are showing us that. But your job is to make sure you're being thoughtful about the people you ask, right? It doesn't always mean ask the most popular teacher because that person's probably writing a lot of rec letters. But it might mean you find the teacher that could really speak about you and your performance in the classroom, who could shed some light on some things that you think are necessary. Maybe it's somebody you also have as a coach after school, or a member, or somebody overseeing a club that you're involved in, who could talk a little bit more about you in other levels. But that's where we're going with the letter of rec. It just gives us some other levels of view of a student about their academic fit and their fit on our campus at large. Now, test scores, we're going to talk about this, and I do expect some questions about what this means in the test optional realm. I'm putting this up here because these are things that Binghamton looks at and many colleges will look at. Oh, thank you. This should help me emphasize what I'm talking about, that section, test scores, right? SAT or ACT, we know about those words, we've heard them before. There are other types of tests like AP exams that could come into review for some colleges. Schools like Binghamton, we're not using your AP exams for admissions review, but it might come in later down the line for credit transfer. But in the world of test optional review, your test scores are part of the academic section of review. And if it's an optional school, Binghamton is a test optional school, you don't need to have that part of your academic review in there in order to be a qualified applicant. About half our students last year did not have test scores, and the admissions rate was about 50-50, right? Students who had test scores submitted, were just in the same line of those who did not submit test scores. This is an option that you would submit, and this is where, when I mentioned you were going to look at your transcript as your academic storyline, your test scores would be one little nugget on that academic storyline. And if you look at your testing average, and the goal is that you take them, ACT and SAT, try them both if you can, at least try one of them, right? Take it, see how you do, and then from there, make that decision. Do I want to try this one more time and maybe super score, put your scores together, right? If you take them twice, we're going to combine your highest average. Are you going to prepare for them? You should. In doing so, you might, on the second time around, feel more confident and ready, and then make a decision. All right, does this represent me as an academic? Does this show a strength of mine as an academic? That's a question to answer when you look at your scores. But then the second follow-up is, all right, of the schools I'm applying to, these 5 schools are test optional. Where do I fit into their testing averages? Because then you have to make that decision with an optional test in mind, meaning, do I want to send my scores to those schools or not? My advice, generally speaking, when you're using test optional as your driver, if your scores are in the middle 50% range of that college or higher, we all will post our middle 50% averages. So for a school like Binghamton last year, our average student, our middle 50%, fell between a 1300 and a 1450 SAT. Those are fairly high on a national level. I don't want to put too much of a spotlight on that. But if your scores were in that 1300 range or higher, you're in our middle 50% or higher. Sending a score generally does not hurt your application. Now, if your scores were just below that, say you had a 1250, on a national level, that's a phenomenal score. We live in the Northeast. Our scores are all high here in a relative sense. But if you had a 1250, that's a really good score. But when you look at the relative strength of that compared to like the Binghamton applicant pool, submitting a 1250 is not necessarily helping. And if something's not helping, my general advice in an application to a college, just like when you fill out a resume, you don't put everything on the resume, you put the things that you want to highlight on the resume. That's the same thing with applying to schools that are test optional. If you feel like it's going to highlight a strength of yours, then you put it. But use that sort of methodology in the back end. How does it look relative to that school? And there's ways that you can apply to all the schools on your list and only send the test scores to the schools that you want. I don't want to make it more confusing. It's not like you have to do this a bunch of extra steps. But then, of course, there's the other part of this. And the part that I think we tend to stress out, sometimes more than whether to send test scores or not, which is who are you as a person in the sense of what are you doing? The extracurriculars, any talents you have, are schools even paying attention to who you are? We are. We do want to know what you're doing outside the classroom. We do want to know how you fit in the school community. We do want to know what you're interested in, partially because we want to see, are you going to continue with that when you get to our level at the next point? Or is this something that we can see that you're really passionate about that's shaping your academic trajectory? All of where I'm getting at, we're not admitting students because we saw that you did 15 clubs and somebody else only did 10, so we'll take the one who did 15 over 10. The extracurriculars are not about showcasing to college what you're good at or why we should take you, but it's telling us a lot more about who you are developing as a person and maybe how that shapes your story. It's frankly the most exciting part when I'm reviewing a student application, to get an idea of what your responsibilities are, what your interests are. Like maybe you could only take care of a sibling after school every day. That's the thing that takes up your time. That's an extracurricular. That's something that we want to know about. You're going to put that on your application, right? Maybe you're a 3-sport athlete and that's what keeps you ticking, right? That's why you're putting it there, not because you think the college is going to be most impressed by the fact that you did 3 sports. That's generally not how that is used. It's more about helping us understand how you're exploring and growing through high school. In some cases, those could come in as a special talent review, right? If you're a recruited athlete, D1, D2, or D3, the additional information may become a very important piece of your college search and application to a college. A special talent review, if you're a talented musician and you're applying to some conservatories or schools where they need that audition, or they need a graphic design portfolio because you're applying to a specialized program, the additional information could take on another sort of heavier weight, but that somewhat depends on the type of program you might end up applying to. Now, the writing part that you're doing, not what your counselor and teachers are doing, the writing part is the other part that is going to be in the mix of who are you as a person. So this is the contextual review. When we review a college essay, which is the personal statement, seniors, you've already worked on that, juniors, you're thinking about this. These are things that we're going to zoom in on when we're reviewing an application, not simply to say, wow, did I like your essay over somebody else's? The question I get all the time in admissions is like, what makes an essay stand out? And I always backtrack and say, first and foremost, we're not looking for any individual essay to stand out. I don't start the application review, I hope this essay stands out to me. I hope this is the best essay I've ever read. Through the process, there are definitely essays that I really enjoyed, and there are essays that I also didn't really enjoy, and in both cases, students were admitted, right? So it's the essay itself is not what's getting you in or not getting you into a school, but it is similar to what I talked about, the extracurriculars. It's helping us understand who are you, what you're interested in, maybe something that you had to overcome, maybe something that you just are excited to tell us about. And that, frankly, should be the biggest driver. It should be something you want to share with a college admissions person, not because you think it's making you more admissible, but because you think it helps them understand you a little bit more. We don't get the opportunity to always meet students and talk to you. This would be similar to that type of opportunity if we got to meet you in person. What is something you want us to know during that encounter? Your essay would be a platform to do something like that. It should be clearly written. It should be something written in your style and your verbiage as a student, not a 55-year-old lawyer voice, unless that's how you talk amongst your friends, and that's fine, but you want that to be true and authentic to you. But this should be something that when we're looking at it, we're like, wow, okay, we see where you're going, we see what you like, we see what makes you tick. That's what the essay is doing. Now, we're reading this, depending on the college, depending on the volume of applications, in a much, much shorter time than it took you to write it. So this is where I always put the emphasis on, you should write clearly, in an excited way, in a way that you communicate, not in a way that makes us think that you are trying to be the next best American novelist. If that's your style of writing, we better see some verification of that coming in from your teacher and your English teacher's letter of rec. Where I'm going with this is write the way you want to write in a way that's clear and communicative. The supplemental essay, colleges that ask that, this is an additional writing piece. It's often tucked in to their application when you're applying, even on the Common App, it's gonna say, well, you finished step one, here's the supplemental piece. Here's the additional writing pieces you have to put together. So if you're applying, again, I'm picking 10 schools as just a good number to talk about, not because that's what you need to apply to. But 10 schools, right, maybe 8 of them have a supplement, maybe less. But that would be additional pieces of writing that you sometimes have to put together specific to that school. If a school is asking you to do a supplement, best believe that is something that they're definitely going to be looking at. That's something that they're really going to zoom into. University of Chicago is always known for having some quite outside-the-box type essay questions in their supplemental piece. They're going to want you to spend some time on that. This shouldn't be something, if your application is due on November 1, that on Halloween night, October 31st, you're like, oh, wait, let me see if they have a supplement. Oh, wow, okay, let me see if I can copy and paste something in there, because that's not going to usually fly. That's where the supplement ends up being one of the more important pieces for the schools that require it. Now, additional information would be a piece of writing that you could add. I'll use the Common App as an example. There's usually a little block in there that you can add any additional information. It's not an essay. It's more paragraph form of something you want to share with the admissions committee about you. It's not necessarily an opportunity for you to just go into depth about your honors award. We don't need that there. What we would want to see more or less, if if you feel like you need to share something. You don't have to share something. But this is a piece where you would put into some context, maybe something that got in the way of your academic trajectory, personal circumstance, or maybe something that you figured out about yourself during high school that maybe colleges wouldn't know unless you talked about it there. It could be something that your counselor is going to share in their letter of rec, but you wanted to add a little bit to your side of the story there. That would be the additional information piece. Again, not required, but that's another piece of writing. And I threw email communication on college writing pieces because it's separate from the application, but we communicate with students all the time. Maybe too much so, and I'm speaking on behalf of colleges. Seniors, you know this. Juniors, you're getting a lot. Sophomores are getting emails now from colleges. You sign up, you fill out forms, you're on our list. We're going to send you a lot. You might send us some information back. You might respond to an email that we ask you a question on. Of the schools that you're really interested in, you're probably going to reach out to those schools. You might have a question you want to ask them. You still should be writing in a way that you're an applicant to that school all throughout the process. A human on the other end is going to read it. I know we have AI doing a lot of the content generation, but humans are reading that, coming back on the other flip side. So I implore students to think seriously about how they communicate to colleges. But please also don't think that the number of emails you write is going to help indicate your interest in that school and make you more admissible. And I say that from somebody, I don't want to tell you how many unread emails I have in my inbox, but what we're trying to do is address your interests and your concerns, not necessarily see who has more time to send us emails. So please ask those questions you have. Parents, importantly, you're going to have great questions, I know this. If it's a question that could be asked via the student, please do so. You might want to tell them, hey, this is a good question we should try to figure out from this school. Help them frame that email. You can send it off to us. We're going to answer it. But now the student has that email record with us. And that could be a good thing in the long run. I know I'm not discouraging parents from reaching out. Sometimes it might be a personal question you need to ask admissions. Totally fine. But more often than not, it's probably a question you all want to ask as a group, and you can send that, and the student should send that. That way we can start that communication track with each other. Okay, junior into senior year. So this is both years. Ultimately, every single year matters. First year, freshman year here, sophomore, that matters a lot, particularly at selective colleges and universities. We're looking at all 4 years. But as you approach into these later 2 years, the trends start to really ratchet up about how important they are. So we're looking, generally speaking, for the most selective colleges and universities out there, for you to be taking a full academically rigorous curriculum. Doesn't mean you have to max everything out that's available. We know that you have a limited, but a lot number of APs offered in honors classes. Generally, the selective schools are looking at students who took the highest or higher levels of challenge and did well with that. So we're going to look for students to kind of get into that level of challenge that you're appropriately ready for. This is where I want you listening to teachers and counselors about what's the right next step. Not what one looks the best, but which one are you ready to do your best work in. That's going to be important, that trend work up. Now, you're going to be looking at ways that you can show that strength over time to give us that vote of confidence that you're ready for the next level. Right? When we do deeper reviews on students, particularly in senior year, a committee review, we're going to look to see, like if you're applying for computer science, that your math grades are pretty solid through and through. You're going to be taking 4 years of math here most likely, but did you get better over time? Maybe you had a rocky road your junior year. Are you showing a strength in your senior year in that math class that you're taking? Those are things we might start diving into. If you're a junior, you're going to start preparing for the SAT or ACT, maybe in a little bit more of a rapid speed as we approach into the winter break time. Then, of course, all throughout, you're working on cultivating your good academic habits as a student. Because again, high school is less about an audition for college, but more about building a platform to do well at the next level. Now, the summertime is often that stressful time that I think students and families, I get questions on, like, what should we be doing that looks good for college? We're probably not analyzing what you did over the summer as, are you a quality applicant or not? Did you do enough research? Did you do that crazy expensive volunteer project in another country? Those are good things if you have the time and the resources to do it and you wanted to do that. We're gonna see that, that's awesome, but it's not necessary to be a good applicant by any means. But you should spend your summer thinking a little deeper about what you wanna do. Go explore colleges, visit. This is junior into senior year, of course. If you're senior into college year, yeah, keep your academic strengths going, read some books. I know you're taking a break, but get ready. If you're getting into an opportunity program at a college, take advantage of that. That's gonna prepare you academically. Those are things that if you're senior into college years, we'll talk to you more about that when the time comes. But the summers can be used as a way to be productive, but not necessarily feel like you have to put yourself on a pedestal to be looked at. Okay, now, for seniors, after you submit your application, things that you should be thinking about is you gotta always be checking your emails. More importantly at senior year level than junior year, because we might be asking you for some follow-up documentation on something that you submitted or maybe did not submit in time. We might have some questions, so definitely be checking those. If a college or a university has a status checker, a portal as we sometimes call it, please set that up. Please make sure it's active and functioning. Again, if you're applying to 10 schools, that's manageable. If you apply to 20, I don't know how anybody can handle 20 different portals and application work. Like, that's a lot. So I feel for you if that's a state that you're trying to get to. You probably don't need it, but you got to keep track of what each school is looking at. It could get cumbersome at times. And then, of course, the follow-up. The follow-up would be, as time rolls along, back to that idea that maybe there are 3 schools on your list that you absolutely love. Those schools should be aware of it at some point. Not every school is literally trying to quantify how interested are you in them. We call that demonstrated interest, where you have to demonstrate an interest. I'm a firm believer, if you are authentically interested in a school, you don't have to try to demonstrate interest. You're just naturally gonna be curious. You're clicking on the stuff we're sending you. You visited. If you couldn't visit in person, you visited virtually. That you're maybe at the visit when a college rep comes to Tuckahoe, or we saw you at another local college fair. You're putting yourself out there. But the follow-up communication is another way of just making sure you're on the right track. If you got deferred to a school and they're a high school on your list, let them know, hey, I still want to be there. Is there a better path for you? If you get waitlisted, which happens, it's not a bad spot to be. In fact, what we're telling you is we really want you here. We're just really trying to make sure we have enough space to get you here. We might not have space, but if we do, guess who we're going to go to? The student who reached out to us and told us absolutely they want to be here. And it doesn't mean just because you emailed, we're only picking you. Other students will email, but you don't want to be the student who just said, oh, I got waitlisted. I hope they pick me and walk away. If it's a school that you really, really want to be at, do your best, do your due diligence to let them know. Now, ultimately, I want to get into some questions. I know I've been talking for quite a bit. Finding fit is the thing that we're really aiming for here. Finding fit is that thing that when you're thinking about this as a student and a family, as a community member, you have to be a little bit more selfish about this. And this is where I try to encourage students and families to stop worrying about what a number tells you to do, what another person tells you to do, what other people encourage you to do. Heed that advice, but think a lot more about where you're looking to go. And if you don't know where you want to go, the college you end up at better feel very comfortable to you, comfortable enough to help you get outside the comfort zone. So here in our modern American society, we love to quantify things. We love to put things on a list, put a number next to it. Trust that somebody else did the math and found the right way to put one school as 1, and another school as 2, and another school as 3. So we don't actually have to do any work. We can just take one of those schools. If we get into the highest number on that list, well then sure, we must go there because that must be a good school. And the truth is it is. It probably is a really good school. The tricky part is that school is good. They will continue to be good. But if you don't do well at that school, the school is still good. They're still high on that list, but you're not, right? You're not at the right spot. You're likely not the one who's going to succeed there. We all have students who might transfer out. Now, schools like Binghamton, I'll point out, we pride ourselves. We have a 92% retention rate. Students who get into Binghamton and come to Binghamton, they find their fit, they find it quickly. We were built in a way that gives a lot of different students a way to find fit. And there are many schools out there like that. But I implore you to think about where you're looking to go. Sometimes there's 64 SUNYs. Let me point at that. There's a SUNY, State University of New York, for those of you hearing that for the first time, for everyone. They're all over New York State. Plus we got 25 CUNYs. New York has 89 public colleges and universities. We're a big state, let's admit to that, but there's no other state close to that in terms of an array of options. Plus the plethora of private options we have here in New York that are excellent. 3 hours around here, you're in 3, 4 different states, right? Depending on how fast you drive. What I'm trying to get at is you have a lot of other publics and privates all around us. When you're diving deep on this, you have plenty of options to think about. We tend to apply to schools that we heard from or heard about, and that's fine, but in terms of selecting a school to go to, it doesn't have to be based on what somebody else told you about that school. It has a lot more to do with what are you bringing to the table. For example, maybe you want to be an entrepreneur, and you look at schools that offer entrepreneurship as an academic program. Cool. Quick little point of reference, most entrepreneurs don't study entrepreneurship. They study the thing they want to start a business in. But yes, rest assured you might want to study entrepreneurship at some level. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, going to the school that has an established entrepreneurship program is a safe route, right? It's fine. But maybe if you want to be an entrepreneur, you go to the school that has a small entrepreneurship program, or they have a little bit of on their webpage, because guess what? You're the student who wants to go to that campus to start up their entrepreneurship program, to be the one that that college puts their resources in, because we saw you step up as a student who would do well here, and we're going to give you resources to succeed with that. So often where I'm going with this is look at the colleges beyond just the ones that have everything you want, but more importantly have the framework for you to do what you want at that school. Okay. The fit part, we can go into many directions, so I'm not going to do too much on that, because a lot of that also comes down to cost. It's got to make actual sense, right? It's got to be a school that you fit in at, you can do well at, that you obviously got into, right? Back to what the colleges are looking at. We decided you would be a good fit for us. Academically, we admitted you. But it has to be a school that makes financial sense to go to. In the long run, no employer is going to ever sit you down and ask you, what did you pay to go to school? All right, well then your salary will be this, right? You're not paid based on what we decide to pay to go to school. You're paid based on what skills you bring. So cost tends to kind of get misaligned with future success if we were looking at it from a financial perspective. I do want you to think about what makes the most sense for you as a student, and families have that conversation earlier rather than later about what makes the most financial sense for us. If you want to go on to be a lawyer or medical school, a lot of my good friends did that via Binghamton. Well, guess what? That's another big wake-up call and cost that come in down the line. Think about that as part of even your early round conversation. And frankly, press the colleges on what the cost really could be or look like and what that means. Where do your graduates go, right? Those are things admissions and our financial aid colleagues will talk to you about. And we're going to, ideally, we want to be as straightforward as we can. We're not going to try to sell you something that doesn't make any sense for you, because again, you're not going to be that happy alumni in the future, nor will you likely stay if it doesn't make the right sense financially. So have those conversations as early as you're ready. Definitely during your senior year, though, before you make your final decision. So, I know I went in a lot of different directions with it. This is a general kind of high view of college. I only dropped in Binghamton a few times. I definitely can answer anything about that in Binghamton, but the SUNY system in general. Mr. Arthur, is it okay if I open it up for some questions? So what are we thinking about? What are some questions? I know we don't have the whole rest of the night. That's a good thing, because I don't want you to get too stressed on this, but go ahead. Excellent question. So the question that came in was, what's the difference between if you get admitted to a school for the fall or for spring? This is a nuance that has been happening. It happens at Binghamton. Yes, and Binghamton over the years has gotten a little savvier on where we are with our graduates. We do graduate a number of our students early. I had actually a lot of good friends who graduated early, meaning 3 years, 3.5 years at Binghamton. That opens up academic space. So when we're admitting students, we're going to admit as many students as we possibly can to start off in that fall of their post-senior year. There are another chunk of students, maybe a couple hundred students every year that we look to find a spot for, knowing that we have about a couple hundred spots starting off in January of that post-senior year. These are high academic achieving students, maybe just a little south of where we were with our overall admissions for that fall program. Often if we admit a student to start off in January of after their senior year, these students are actually on the wait list for the fall. So they have that double offer. If there's a spot for them in the fall, we're trying to get them in. But at the earliest next level, we try to get them in for January. Full disclosure, a school like Binghamton, 30% of our students, 1,000 students every year, transfer in. Some of our best students are doing this. This is under that notion that these are students we may end up seeing as a transfer. Let's try to get them here as early as we can. That would happen. There's a slight academic difference, but not a drastic one. But often those students are also on the wait list for the fall, so we are starting to pick some of those students. And yes, there are some students who get in for January, like, guess what, I'm traveling, studying abroad in the fall. Thank you, but I'll see you in January anyway. There's some programs for that too. Yeah, so that has, and it was a great program for about 10 years at Binghamton, knowing that we had so many qualified transfers coming in. We tried to work on stepping stone paths that were already designed by Binghamton. SUNY Broome is our local other SUNY. They're right in the other side of the city of Binghamton. They put in their own dorms. So actually, over the last couple years, they've transferred into this bigger program where they're admitting students directly to their track. Most of our transfer students numerically are coming from SUNY Broome. So sometimes I will tell a student, you should also be applying to SUNY Broome. It's technically a 2-year school. We have direct affiliations with them to transfer right into Binghamton or actually Cornell or Syracuse. Those are good other feeder tracks there. Some of our best transfers are actually staying within Westchester County. WCC financially saves a ton of our families a lot of money, and then they come to Binghamton for their next 2 years, depending on what path they're on, or other CUNYs or SUNYs. This works out quite well in the SUNY system. Go ahead. So applying as a transfer student is a little bit more straightforward than a first year, especially if you've completed 24 college credits once in college. So it's usually about 1 full year done. We're looking at your college performance at this point. Generally 3.0 or higher. I will say though, in our School of Management, Decker College of Nursing, our Watson College of Engineering, so we have 6 colleges, they're going to look a little bit more in detail about your overall performance in that subject matter, and they tend to start at about a 3.5 or higher. But no essay required. Their test scores aren't part of that picture unless you decide to send them. It's a little bit more straightforward. Go ahead. Nice sweatshirt or shirt. Yeah. So last year, if we're looking at the average accepted student, the mid-range fell between a 93 and a 98. And here at Tuckahoe, I think the highest student had, what, 102, 3, somewhere around that. So you have about a solidly weighted GPA. What I mean by that, it's a true GPA. You could get a weighted GPA here. That's what we're going to use, is where I'm going with that. So probably about a 96 last year. 3.8 or so on a 4.0 scale. Look, we are using the 100-point scale at Binghamton, so we're just going to look at your weighted GPA that's on your transcript. But where did that GPA come from, the average come from? That's most important. Not the number itself, but how you got there. Go ahead, and then I'll come over there. Yeah. Right, so the question is, if you're applying early decision for the schools that offer it, you may be sacrificing the ability to negotiate the financial side of the picture. So the cost is, the schools that offer early decision, my colleagues that I know that work at those schools, they will have that honest conversation up front before you apply about what the financial landscape would look like. In some cases, if a school is going to openly tell you, look, you're not going to be able to negotiate the financial aid picture because you do have to submit your financial documents, but that might come in after the decision's already made. The only loophole that I often see with early decision is like if push comes to shove, you really financially can't afford to be there, that would be the only way to maybe back out of that decision. But even then, it's a bit tricky. So yes, what your question is with an early decision application, you have to also do your due diligence on the financial front. It may put you out of the running for certain sort of scholarships. Might not though, right? A school that offers it, they would have that honest conversation with you, but it's definitely worth that combo at some point with the college, with your counselor, with the family. It's involved, yeah. Correct. You're committing to that school, but the school also wants to make sure that you're not transferring out of that school. So yes, you're committed to the price that they're probably telling you based on their calculator that they might have, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're committing to the full price and they're just going to assume you're going to pay $100,000 every year. I can't speak on behalf of every early decision school, but there's a functional side that they want to make sure that they're meeting you at where you can afford to be there too, using whatever institutional aid they may have. Maybe not merit scholarship per se, but. So supplementals at Binghamton, no. Not many of the SUNYs that I know of offer a supplement or require a supplement. We're trying to make it a little bit more accessible. In fact, many of the seniors know for 2 weeks it was a free application week to all the SUNYs. So you can apply to any SUNY, I think up to 5 for free. But there's not an additional supplement. Unless you're applying via EOP, the Educational Opportunity Program, there's a few more questions it's going to ask about your eligibility for the program. Is there a question over here? I thought I saw one pop up. Mm.
Like our son is interested in film, and the process seems so much more for that. It's like a whole portfolio with the application, and some schools that maybe have a 50% admission rate for the film program have a 10% because they take much smaller
Right.
amounts of children.
So sometimes when you're applying, well, my first recommendation when you're applying to schools, if you know exactly that you're interested in something specific, you should be applying to that type of program, but you also should be applying to many schools that offer that type of program, particularly because you might run into the scenario where the selectivity of that program is much more selective than the overall school admission rate. Nursing, this happens to all the time. Some art-based programs, it could happen. Computer science lately, because a lot of students want to apply into that. But you still, if you know that's what you want to start with that. And then ideally get into a school that offers it. It's less about the school now, it's more about the program if that's the case. But that question is solid that you want to be asking a college that offers that program about what that looks like in terms of admissions. Do they require a portfolio review? Do they need you to, in some cases, not in film, but audition for a program in the arts? It could have a factor of that review. At a place like Binghamton, our cinema program, which would be our film, doesn't require any additional supplements or any additional pieces of review. It's a very small program, it's great, but the professor who runs that department does like to reach out and work with applicants. So that's what you often sometimes find in these smaller, more nuanced programs, that you might want to do a little bit more legwork as a family, as a student applying, to reach out to the departments directly beyond just what the admissions office is doing. That would help in the vast majority of cases, but again, you want a wide list of schools that offer film or cinema. Got time for maybe one more? All right? Yeah, couple. What is Tuckahoe's reputation? Well, and I asked my dad, he said that this was the only school that beat Dobbs Ferry back in the day, so I don't like Tuckahoe. No, okay. Tuckahoe's reputation is solid, it's great. Here's the thing, you're in Westchester County. I'm speaking on behalf of Binghamton University, which gets As I mentioned, 50,000 applications. I had 700 different high schools from New York City send applications to Binghamton. I think 60-something different high schools in Westchester. There's a lot. We admit people from every school, irregardless of what we think about the school. And the truth is, our thought, the college's thought about a school, doesn't actually play into a student's admissibility. Now, where I'm going with this is, your job as a student is to do well with whatever you have in front of you. Tuckahoe is excellent. We understand the rigors that are here. We understand the community to an extent, but this is Binghamton speaking, right? Because we get a lot of students applying, relatively speaking, from Tuckahoe, from local schools around here. We have a sense of what's offered here. Our job, though, is not to say compare a student from Tuckahoe to a student from Scarsdale, to a student from Yonkers Middle High School, to a student from Idaho Math and Science. Right? We don't do that. I don't know any college that literally will do that. We tend to think that's what happens, right? That we're being looked at relative to even our neighbor schools, but even worse, relative to our neighbor student. We don't actually look at students compared to one another. Now, we have an idea, again, of who could be a good fit based on historical kind of track records, what a 96 would look like here versus a 92, right? Those numbers matter, but relative outside of that, look, it's a small district. You're not going to have endless amounts of resources per se, and that's not going to hold you back. But at the same time, if you don't take advantage of the resources you have as an individual, it doesn't matter what Tuckahoe is known for. You know, you might not have been ready for that, the Binghamton level, but maybe another level that you can succeed at. I love your question, and I want to answer that with a lot more words, because it matters only to this extent that you take advantage of what you're doing here. That's what matters to us. But personally, I love Tuckahoe.
Worked with so many universities over several years. Every university has a profile of every student that graduates from the university. So they can see if Rodney Arthur came from Tuckahoe, attending Binghamton University, how did I do over my 4 years, right? And then they can look at that with all the other students who've graduated from Tuckahoe and really compare. Did any of the students drop out? Did any of the students end up in academic probation? Or did all the students do well? Did all the students graduate? And that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that also helps to add to the profile of the school.
It absolutely does, and I do know my peers on the private level. When you see a school that has an acceptance rate of less than 10%, there's a lot of factors at play there, and they're looking at not only is the student going to succeed here, but in some cases, can they afford to be here? In some cases, is this a good fit student that we don't often get, or is this a student that we know historically has always done well because we see what they have at that school year in and year out? Those factors can play in, but the best influence you have on all those factors is being a good, solid applicant with what you have in front of you, and less about what your school is doing. It's more about what you're doing at your school. Go ahead. Mm. Yeah. So when we talked about the average, the mid 50% range, those are ballpark ideas that just give you a framework of, all right, the typical student at Binghamton has a 95, 96 average. Doesn't mean, oh, if you have a 96 at your high school, you're right in the middle, so your chances are 50% or something like that sort. We're not doing that. We hope you're not doing that. But what it's telling you is that typical student is doing well with whatever curriculum they have. We're absolutely aware of the nuances inside of a school, right? We understand, and there's hundreds of schools I can think of, less so, outside of New York, but many in New York, not hundreds, but many in New York that have a very high weighted GPA. We know what a student who has 118 average at a specific high school looks like compared to a student who has a 95. That 95 is not the same 95 that would be here. Those factors are always looked at, but not because we're comparing the schools together. We're looking at a student relative to what's offered at their school and how they're doing with their performance. So it's totally understood, and that's where I don't like us getting too caught up in the numbers. but understanding what the numbers are telling us. It's telling us where you want to be aiming towards for your respective list of schools that you're looking at. All right. These are good. I love where your minds are at. I'm glad you also showed up tonight to do all that thinking. Thank you.
You know, before I thank Craig, and Craig is a dear friend, one of the things you're going to, if you hear the board presentation tonight, you're going to hear me speak a little bit about what does it mean to really prepare students for academic excellence. You know, one of the things that Craig knows from the work that I've done before, I've been in different schools where, you know, I didn't allow school counselors to have the authority to drop students from classes, right? Because we know that preparing students for academic excellence, all students, right, need to be challenged, need to be exposed to rigor. They need to be challenged in terms of taking courses, regardless of planning to go to college, military, or not. Why? Because they're fundamental skills, critical thinking being one of them. It does not matter what your pathway is, you still need those skills. So I just had a parent who said to me, I think a couple of weeks ago, that, you know, I want my child dropped in this class. My child doesn't need to be, my child's not going to college. And I said to the father, I said, but your child is still looking to earn a career, correct? So your child really needs to be in that class to be able to develop those critical thinking skills and some of the other skills that are needed. But it was not a situation where the parent was being receptive. So part of my work here, as I've done in other places, is creating an environment where students, parents, right, understands the value of taking honors and AP courses, no matter what their path is forward. So that's part of the work that I need to do, right, with my staff. All right, so I want to thank Mr. Broccoli for making time for us. As I indicated, this is the first of many to come. Mr. Broccoli would tell you, having worked in this is my third school now, being principal, where I've worked with him, one school in particular that did not have a good track record, that we changed dramatically. Within 5 years, I think I'd gotten like 19 students accepted to Binghamton, right? So the fact is, we are on a move forward, and we're going to continue to give our students the opportunity of choice, right? By preparing them with these essential skills that are needed, no matter what their path is forward. So again, I thank Mr. Broccoli for being here. Thank you for being here. And this recording we'll share out with families as well as the presentation, all right? Good night, everyone.